365 Sports earlier this week, we were at Big 12 Media Day. So was Justin Williams, theathletic.com. A lot of people were in the media, and he joins us now on 365 Sports with Craig and Paul, David Smoke. Justin, from the couple of days you were there, what were maybe 2 or maybe 3 or 4 things that caught your attention the most?
Yeah, I mean, one of them was, I think a lot of talk about Texas Tech, right? They spent all that money. Cody Campbell, the billionaire booster that kind of spearheaded that, he was actually there on Wednesday, the day after Texas Tech was there. I think he was on with you guys, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so that's just, they've been kind of the hot topic just throughout college football, not just the Big 12. And so, one of the things we wrote about on The Athletic was kind of an anonymous poll of what the opposing Big 12 coaches thought of them. But, it's kind of, a lot of that came up organically too, just because of the waves they've been making. So definitely they stood out. Honestly, one that was interesting to me that I didn't expect going in was a lot of positive Utah buzz. They kind of fell off last year a little bit, and the offense really struggled, had a bunch of quarterback injuries. But they bring in Devin Dampier from New Mexico. They got the New Mexico offensive coordinator. So kind of a reset on offense, really good up front on the offensive line. They were one that maybe going into it I wasn't totally expecting to be a hot topic, and they were. And then, look, he was there the least of any head coach in the conference, but it didn't take long for Deion Sanders to make headlines when he showed up on Wednesday. And so it feels like anytime he's in the room, the gravity's going to move in his direction. Over the course of the 2 days, those were kind of the ones that popped out to me. Honestly, there was a bunch of stuff. I'd never met Rich Rodriguez. He was hilarious. He was, you understand why he kind of fits in there with his coal mining family background at West Virginia. Obviously had success there before, but I think it's hard to talk to him and not realize why he's just a ball coach and had a bunch of success. So you could kind of go on down the line, but those ones that I threw out, I think were kind of headliners for me.
Justin, what did you make of Scott Frost and his evasiveness on his past at Nebraska?
Yeah, I guess I was in the room when some of my colleagues kind of that became a story that, his thing was he didn't want to talk about Nebraska, which honestly is fine. But when you put it that way, that's going to become the story, right?
Yep.
It seemed like he didn't have a very good answer for a question that he should have known he was going to get. This was, kind of a high profile. Like I said, a lot of national media there. You're at conference media days. So you're maybe outside of the UCF bubble a little bit, and you might get some questions about your last stop. And I understand if he didn't have a good experience there, didn't want to talk about it. I'm just surprised he didn't have, maybe a better answer ready that could have kind of diffused that. You look at totally different situation, but BYU and Jake Retzlaff, everyone kind of knew that was going to be a topic. Kalani Sitake, head coach, a difficult situation, but he had an answer ready to go that he kind of gave for probably the 50 times he got asked about it on Tuesday. Scott Frost, whether he didn't think he was going to get asked about Nebraska or whether that was kind of the plan that he went into it, I was surprised that was the answer that he gave. And then I was also surprised, or I was not surprised then that kind of became the story based on his answer.
Now, you're absolutely right. I mean, Kalani he gave the answer, and then he gave an answer that was good enough that you just moved on, right? You're just like, okay, well, that great, perfect answer. That's all you needed to say. And as a matter of fact, we do have updated news on Jake Retzlaff here in the last few minutes, Justin. I know you wrote about him a couple of days ago, but he put out a message announcing his departure from BYU, and according to the early reporting, he is going to withdraw and just go enroll at another school. And some of the details here about whether he could enter the portal or not is getting kind of confusing in the comments. But the point being, he's leaving BYU and he is going to be withdrawing. So do you have any thoughts on Retzlaff and that latest update?
Yeah, I believe Pete Thamel reported this first, but it sounds like he's going the Xavier Lucas route.
Yes.
As the kid from Wisconsin that kind of, the Wisconsin wouldn't let him jump in the portal, so he withdrew and then enrolled at Miami. It rose a lot of questions about what does the transfer portal actually mean? Again, different situation with the Retzlaff, but as I understand it, that's kind of the path that he's going to go. Unenrolling from BYU, then he probably ends up somewhere else. Look, it puts BYU in a tough spot. Now, I think they were going to be in that spot anyways because it sounds like he was going to be suspended if he returned. But not much experience behind him, certainly not in the BYU system. I think Tyler Bourget was a Western Michigan transfer who's been there a couple years and had some previous starting experience. McKay Hillstead had started previously at Utah State. And then Bear Bachmeier, who's a true freshman, actually transferred in the spring window from Stanford. Really talented. His brother plays there at receiver. I think that they like his potential moving forward. But again, true freshman, and none of these guys have thrown, have started the game for BYU. And so for a team that was in the running for a Big 12 championship last year, and I think has a lot back and has a lot of positive momentum, now suddenly there's a big question mark. And on the other side of that, I'm curious to see where Retzlaff ends up, right? Like, he's going to be going to a place a couple weeks before fall camp starts. It's hard to imagine that, he's going to, have the time needed to kind of pick things up and ingrain himself as a quarterback there. But if he goes to a spot, it's hard to think of many power conference spots where he'd go in and start. But, wherever he lands, he's very talented. So I think it'll be interesting to see, like, how quickly he's able to get acclimated and if he can make an impact, whether it's the start of this year or at some point down the road.
I'm trying to think, and just as you were saying that, and Craig brought it up, when was the last time somebody at that position, quarterback position, arrived on campus, not that he was signed as a commitment or recruit or whatever, that was this late in the summer? Or late in the summer, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some instances where maybe a non-early enrollee freshman, came in the traditional cycle and maybe made an impact. But yeah, I'm sure if we all thought about it for a moment, maybe there would be an analogous situation. But I'm not sure if there is. People have tossed around Tennessee because Nico left, and they brought in Aguilar from UCLA earlier. They want a little more insurance there. Maybe, but again, like it's also going to be a difficult situation in the locker room. It seemed like Retzlaff was really well liked at BYU based on the players we talked to this week. So I don't think there'd be any situation personality-wise necessarily. But you're just bringing on some attention, and then you're bringing someone in, late that kind of jumbles up the whole plan. So I'll be fascinated to see where he lands and how quickly, if at all, he's able to make an impact. Because he is, he's talented. He obviously helped them, last year, and they were really banking on him this year at BYU. So I certainly think he could impact the team. It's just he's being put in a pretty tough situation to be able to do that.
I would, like, when we talked about it last week or, a couple weeks ago when he was leaving, I just thought Wisconsin would have been the one team where he might be able to slide right in and nothing would happen. But again, it's super hard to figure out just because it's July.
Right. And I don't know exactly what, the specifics are. Obviously, Xavier Lucas seems to have kind of seamlessly done the withdrawal and enroll and be on the football team situation. But I don't know if, that aspect makes it a little bit tougher to kind of get things situated. I really don't know. I assume he's going to make a decision here in pretty short order because of the short timeline. But it's definitely going to be kind of one of those more interesting storylines worth tracking. And obviously the impact it's going to have on BYU will have some ripple effects as well.
So you were a part of that combo piece. In fact, somebody in the chat, we'd love all of our viewers, said that they wish that Texas Tech was getting more coverage. I can't imagine anybody in college football, no matter who they have been over the last 100 years or last year or two, has had more coverage than Texas Tech. You wrote about them as well. They are the factor, the it factor right now. They are the one that's getting the attention. Your thoughts about the reaction to your story?
Yeah, again, I kind of mentioned this. I think they're one of the most fascinating stories in all of college football this offseason. And so, it's really unique because of the money and the resources being pumped in there. But as Joey McGuire, head coach, kind of openly said this week, yes, there's some jealousy. Yes, there's a bullseye on their back. This is also a program that went 8-5 last year, has never even played for the Big 12 championship, let alone won it. And honestly, they've kind of set themselves up for a Big 12 title or bust type season with the money that they've infused in this team. And look, other coaches have taken notice, and we asked about a dozen of them anonymously to kind of give their thoughts. Some of them probably said what they would have said on the record. I think some of them opened up a little bit more, whether it was, there was some like genuine jealousy of, man, I wish our program had that. We would definitely be doing the same thing. And then you had, maybe a little bit more, sour grapes, bitter jealousy of people saying, I don't know if it's good for college football, or I kind of think the amount of money and the way they're overpaying, players in their opinion kind of rubbed them the wrong way. So it was kind of a fascinating insight. But I think the big takeaway is like, look, this is going to be the team that everyone is keeping an eye on, definitely in the Big 12, but also throughout college football this season. A non-traditional power. I don't know if they're spending above what Ohio State or Texas or, some of these other bigger schools is, but because they've never done this before, they're putting all this money, they're bringing on all this attention. Now everyone wants to see if it's going to work.
Justin, we interviewed almost every coach, save for, I think, 4 this week. And one of them that stood out to me was Scott Satterfield. Seems like he feels genuinely confident about his team. That is right in your backyard. You covered Cincinnati exclusively for a long time before you started working for The Athletic. What feel do you get? Is he maybe right?
I mean, I definitely think this is the most talented of the 3 years he's been there in terms of the roster he has. He has a lot of continuity. They're bringing Brendan Sorsby back, who started the year really strong at quarterback last year. He fell off a little bit towards the end of the year. I think the receivers had a lot to do with that, and they went out and they upgraded that position as well. And then they brought back guys like Joe Royer, who he could be a first-round pick at tight end in the next draft. Dante Corleone, a first-team All-Big 12 player in the middle at defensive tackle. They kind of have these leaders in place, especially on defense, at all 3 levels that they're bringing back, and then they went out and added in the portal. So from that perspective, yeah, I think there's a right to be confident because the roster's improved. I also think he kind of has to be confident because the flip side is, look, if this team doesn't play very well this year, they haven't made a bowl game the past 2 years under him, then that, the hot seat is really going to start to heat up under him. And so I think the best way he can go into it is feeling a little bit confident and kind of praising his team. They're one of those teams to me that are right in kind of the meaty middle of the Big 12, where they could go either way. Last year they went 5-7. They had a couple close losses. They were only a few plays away from maybe being 7-8 wins. I think that could be the case this year, where it's going to come down. A lot of these games come down to being close. If kind of those close games, a few of them go in their favor, then you're looking like, hey, this is really a step forward for this program, and Satterfield has them moving in the right direction. And if some of those tight games go against them the way they have the past couple of years, then I think you're going to have people looking around and saying like, man, does Cincinnati need to make a change because these first 3 years in the Big 12 have not gone the way that they hoped.
Well, I don't know if everything's gone the way people hoped with the Deloitte and the clearinghouse. It sounds like yesterday was kind of a mess, Justin. What was your take on everything?
Yeah, so the College Sports Commission, I'm trying not to throw too many acronyms because it seems like that's all that is out there anymore. But they put out some new guidance on the clearinghouse. And honestly, it was not a huge surprise to me, and I think for a lot of people that were following the settlement, this was a big part of what the settlement wanted to do. It wanted to rein in collective by using this clearinghouse. And so I think there was some questions initially of people wondering are they really going to crack down on this? These big money collective deals that, might not be quote unquote true NIL, or are they going to deny those? And I think there's been kind of a lag where some of these deals were getting submitted and there wasn't a decision. And it looks like they kind of reintroduced some refreshed guidance that basically said, look, if it's a deal from a collective, it's probably not going to get approved. There has to be this valid business purpose and range of compensation. And I think the idea of a collective paying $500,000 and a player kind of tweeting out how much he loves the collective, that's not going to fly under this new clearinghouse system. So now the question is, what happens? Do some lawsuits start flying and arguing that this is more antitrust complaints? Or, it's just something I wrote about a couple weeks ago. Does maybe no one complains and no one raises a stink, and that's because we're going back to the old days of the bag man paying under the table? I don't know. Maybe in an ideal world, everyone just decides to follow and agree to these rules. That hasn't really been the case in college football for 100 years. But it's kind of the line in the sand has been drawn that these collective deals that happened the past few years, they're not going to be approved under this new clearinghouse. And now I think it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds here in the next few months.
Will there be any give and take on what they say is allowed compared to what is allowed?
Meaning what the clearinghouse says?
Yeah, will they budge at all? Is this pretty much they drew a line in the sand and they're not going to change no matter the barking from yesterday from many of the collectives?
I don't think so. I mean, I think they're kind of saying like, look, we put a bunch of time and money into this settlement, and this was a big part of it. And so I think they realize there's going to be some lawsuits, some legal action. It feels to me like the CSC is saying, all right, bring it on. You're going to have to show us why all this time we put into the settlement, why that wasn't a good enough answer with whatever case you bring. And, based on, I don't know if you guys saw some of the legal fees that are getting handed out in that settlement case, but based on the way that billable hours work, I will not be at all surprised if there are some lawsuits that get filed and some lawyers that are willing to kind of take that challenge on.
Did I see $250 million?
$800 million.
The attorney fees?
Total.
I mean, I think $750 million could get up to $800. Yeah, over the course of the next 10 years. So, look, I love covering football. I love being in the media, but sometimes you see numbers like that, and I wonder if I chose the wrong career.
Guess what? The law schools paid off now for them. I mean, they don't have any more debt. Here's a tweet. You guys just saw this while you guys were talking about it from David McKenzie, who's a lawyer. So NIL collectives cannot have a valid business purpose if their purpose is to pay athletes, unless they act as marketing agencies whose purpose is to help other businesses pay athletes, in which case their purpose of paying athletes becomes a valid business purpose.
It's a little bit of the what's the Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where he's looking at the string with the board and he's kind of trying to figure out. There's a little bit of confusion here, but you're right. And this has been the problem from the beginning. This was the problem before the settlement. I think this will be the problem in the settlement, is until there's something definitive, whether it's Congress deciding to get involved or some kind of an antitrust exemption, or there's been a lot of talk about employment status and collective bargaining. The settlement everyone said was not the final answer, and I think we're seeing why we still need to get to that final answer, because there's still a bunch of confusion.
All right, so in the end, the Big 12 is a conference that you look at the various metrics, et cetera, and there's very little difference in how many wins the team at the top that might win it compared to the team that might struggle, a Utah or an Oklahoma State. In the end, that is kind of what people think about the Big 12 as deep, but no one thinks enough think of them as deep and good. Do you feel like that can change this year because of the quarterback play?
I think so. I think it's last year I feel like there was a bunch of really good running backs that kind of defined the conference. I think just looking this year at the quarterback, it's a lot of guys coming back, or a lot of entrenched starters. And I think that's going to help when you talk about kind of the strength of the team. And honestly, like, we're maybe one play away from the narrative on the Big 12 being different, right? If Arizona State beats Texas, if they stop them on that fourth down and they get out of that game in what I think it was the Fiesta Bowl, or excuse me, the Peach Bowl last year, like, maybe the narrative is a little bit different because Arizona State advanced. And so, yeah, I think with what they did last year, with what Texas Tech is kind of, showing the potential to do this year, I think if a team goes out and has a good year and maybe makes a little noise in the playoff, then all of a sudden you feel like, all right, maybe the Big 12 will get a little bit more respect, or has a chance to get multiple teams in. And I think if that happens, it'll because a couple of these quarterbacks in this conference step up and have really good seasons.
All right. Thank you, Justin. Appreciate your time. Justin Williams, theathletic.com.